what we were primarily for, first and foremost, was to how can we even improve the total cost of ownership, reduce energy costs for the exhibitor primarily, and then at the same time enhance the viewing experience on top of that. So we're kind of killing two birds with one stone here.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Luria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And in this week's episode, a report from CineEurope. My colleague Chad Kennerk and I are going to be going over the movies coming up at the box office this weekend, including the opening weekend forecast of F1 and Megan 2.0. And after that, we'll be joined by Sperling Reich from Celluloid Junkie, who will give us his recap of not only CineEurope 2025, but Sperling also attended the Cannes Film Festival, which Box Office Pro did not go to this year. Sperling will give us all his updates from both the Barcelona and Southern France events. And then in the last segment of this week's episode, we've got Christie's Alan Fernandez talking about the technology leaders' latest innovations, as well as some of their insights from CineEurope 2025 as well. Packed episode. I can't wait to get started, but let's start the way we usually do. Chad, what did you watch last weekend?
Daniel, it's summer movie season, so I've been seeing so much at the cinema. I saw Elio, Pixar's new film.
Oh, you were the one. Congratulations. I was wondering if anyone bought a ticket. I'm glad someone did. It's someone I know, too. Great.
As great as Pixar sequels are, it's refreshing to see an original effort from them. So we'll see how the word of mouth does. I think in the long run, it will find its audience. I just hope that can happen in the cinema.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough road ahead for Elio. We warned our listeners last week on the podcast that it was tracking to be potentially the lowest opening weekend over a traditional frame of all time for a Pixar release. That ended up being the case with a $20.8 million debut domestically. Unfortunate for that title, but the good thing is you saw other movies too.
I did. 28 years later, which I know you saw as well.
Oh, yeah. Man, did I see that movie? It's like 4 movies rolled up in one, Chad.
It really is. This franchise hits differently post-pandemic.
Yeah, right?
These aren't like dead zombies. These are people that were infected with a virus.
Yeah. Yes. Man, it was an interesting experience. I was there for Thursday previews at the AMC West 84th Street on the Upper West Side here in Manhattan with a commercial audience, especially when you go on a Thursday preview, they're all in the bag. I think everyone was completely concentrated on the screen. Chad, I'm not sure if 28 years later is a good movie. What I do know is that I had a great time watching it.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's the important thing when it comes to these sort of summer movie picks is the experience of seeing something in a communal setting. I'm sure 2 years, 3 years from now, when I watch this at home, I rewatch it, from my living room, I'm probably not going to like it as much. Why? Because it's a little bit disjointed. It really feels like it's launching the planned trilogy that we know that the Danny Boyle is setting out to do. The second one already finished, scheduled to release from director Nia da Costa, coming out in January 2026. The third one still isn't confirmed quite yet after the $30 million debut of 28 years later. I'm thinking they might as well. I think it was a solid performance for that title. Ultimately, like I said, it's hard to say if it's going to be a movie I rewatch a lot. And if I do, I don't think I'll have as good a time as I did watching this in a communal setting. A perfect example of a movie that you like more when you see in a theater with an audience.
I think it's going to depend on 2 and 3 because this really is a trilogy and it feels like that. But it asks some interesting questions about what happens to humanity in a kill or be killed situation.
And that's why I do think this third entry in the series maybe takes a backseat to the first two, which feel like a lot more complete films in their own right. They feel self-contained, but they still build on each other 28 days later and 28 weeks later. That is, 28 years later seems like a movie of this era in studio filmmaking where you are telling a story, but you're also introducing elements that are going to be fleshed out in movies to come and movies that may not come. Right? Because we don't know if 3 is going to come out or not. So it does depend ultimately, like you mentioned, on how the second and third land. And for that reason, it's hard for me to say that I like this as much as the first two, but that's a high bar. The first two in the series are fantastic titles. Part 3, 28 years later, obviously getting some very strong reviews. The audience I was with was completely into it the entire running time. And after a $30 million debut, I think it's all positive from here. It came a little bit under our own expectations, but that's because tracking, I think, suggested a bigger performance. I suspect audiences will eventually catch up with this. And then finally, the last movie that we both saw is actually coming out this weekend from Apple and Warner Brothers, F1 the movie. I'm a big F1 fan, so I can share my feelings in a little bit. Chad, what is your familiarity with Formula One racing when not associated with a major feature film?
It's non-existent.
That's good. That's why we need to have this conversation.
Yes, yeah,
You're
very different
completely going in
perspectives.
cold
Yes.
and blind.
Yes, completely blind. Never seen an F1 race. As with any great sports movie, the races themselves are the heartbeat of F1. And what I love is there's no CGI cars here with digital backgrounds. It is all shot during actual Grand Prix weekends. And so, like Top Gun Maverick, that authenticity really immerses you in the experience. So, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It's a great sports movie.
Did you ever feel lost? Because the problem with Formula One, not only as a movie, but also as a sport, is it's less of a visual sport as much as it's a math sport. Like the actual competitiveness of Formula One racing is an engineering and finding out like wind tunnels. It's very geeky and wonky. And visually, it's kind of hard, I think, for even sport fans to tune into a race weekend and know exactly what's going on. So what I think the screenplay does right, and I think what Joseph Kosinski absolutely nails down here, is that it gives you enough auditory exposition through like commentators to slowly guide you very much in a beginner level on everything that's happening during the races. And then that Kosinski direction, using that visual language that he delivers exceptionally well in Top Gun Maverick, he has the exact same magic here, where it's 100% visual storytelling to drive the entire movie. So, yeah, the dialogue, I don't know if you felt this way, seems a little bit elementary, but I think that's by design. This is a movie built for global audiences.
Yeah.
It's a very, very basic dialogue, and it sort of holds your hand through the entire movie, but so much of the movie works visually. So I don't mind it. It's basic and elementary by design. It's done in a way that it can very simply communicate everything that's going on in the screen, because it's going to be very hard to deliver a cohesive narrative and just have audiences follow a race if you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, and I never felt talked down to, and I also never felt that there was too much exposition and really explaining. It was just enough. It was just right.
It's got enough cliches of a sports movie that if you don't like cliches from sports movies, you know, honestly, probably this was never going to be the movie for you. But the real treat here is the sounds of a race.
Yes.
This sounds fantastic in a Dolby Atmos auditorium. It looks fantastic on an IMAX screen. I've seen it in both formats by now. It's really a gorgeous movie to see and hear. And I can't wait to feel this movie, because I have tickets down in Austin, Texas for early next week to see this at the Galaxy Theaters by my sister's house that has D-Box seats there. D-Box is, is an immersive seating technology that works very closely with racing simulators. So I can't wait to feel this movie in a third viewing. So my first viewing was on a big IMAX screen, looked great. Second one was in an Atmos auditorium, sounded incredible. Third one's going to be in immersive seating. That's an experience that I did with Top Gun Maverick, another Kosinski film. Kosinski is really emerging as a PLF filmmaker in a way that few are, that any different premium format you watch his films with gives you a different experience.
Yeah, and how fun to have a summer movie that really plays to those formats.
Absolutely. And I can't compliment the direction enough. I remember back when Ford versus Ferrari came out. What was that? 3-4 years ago? Longer. That's 2019, right? I can't believe it. But I interviewed James Mangold, the director of that film. And it was very interesting in that he was telling me that his big challenge in adapting a race, an auto race, into a feature film is making it work visually in a cohesive way. basically telling the story of a competitive race throughout a number of laps on screen. Because on television, it can also be very hard to follow everything that's going on. And I think Mangold accomplished it perfectly in Ford versus Ferrari, but I do think Kaczynski improves on that in F1. Now, as an F1 fan, these things will go over your head, but I do appreciate them. Lewis Hamilton, who is a race car driver, Formula One driver, and also a producer on this title, his dog is in the movie and receives credit. You see a glimpse of Roscoe the dog. I am a big fan of the Mexican driver, now former driver in F1, Checo Perez. He has a small cameo. He's the first guy to get passed by, by Brad Pitt in the movie, unfortunately. But it was great to see him back on
if
the
you're
grid.
going to be lapped by anybody, I mean,
make sure it's Brad Pitt. Unfortunately, by the end of Checo's run, he got lapped by a lot of people. But, for an F1 fan, I think there are enough real-world cameos to keep it interesting and lighthearted. If you're an F1 fan expecting to find realism in this movie, there isn't. There isn't, which is fine. This isn't going to be like watching a race at home. This is a movie, may I remind you. So there is very little adherence to logic, reality, or physics to any of the races that happen in the film, but to the benefit of the film, because if you are a Formula One fan, you know that especially these days, it can get quite boring in a lot of races once the leader gets in the front of the pack. So this is very much a Hollywood take on a sport, and it adheres to reality as much as Rocky movies adhere to reality of boxing, for example. Mm-hmm. Very, very little to the benefit of the film in front of your eyes. And I had a fantastic time. For my taste, we're halfway through the year. This is the best studio movie of 2025, in my opinion. I know Sinners is out there. I didn't forget Sinners. I loved Sinners. For my taste, a summer movie, this is the one to beat.
Warner Brothers is on a roll.
I know. Q1, they were going through a hard time, but these days, much better. And that's going to continue this weekend because we have an opening weekend forecast between $45 and $55 million for F1, the movie. Realistically, we do expect this movie to open up in the mid 40s, but because of that premium large format draw, this can climb to 50 million or slightly above through the weekend if it catches fire. We can't say the same thing about Megan 2.0, which is unfortunately tracking very poorly. Right now, we have an $18 to $25 million opening weekend range for Megan 2.0. A movie that felt like lightning in a bottle. A couple years back already in that Q1 debut. It's very different going from the doldrums of the January, February box office to competing for screens in the middle of summer. This just doesn't seem like a summer movie to me. And I'm just not hearing it from our panelists and our forecasting panel that there's enough ticket sales here to get excited.
Horror movies also seem to always have diminishing returns and sequels more often than not. And so to stick her in the middle of a very competitive summer movie season, it's
always going to be a challenge. Always going to be a challenge. And before we turn it over to Sperling, we got some news from our friends over at the Will Rogers Motion Pictures Pioneer Foundation. Their honoree for their next gala has been announced.
Yeah, the Pioneer of the Year award is going to be bestowed on Kate Hudson, of course, an actress, but she's also made quite a splash as a singer and an entrepreneur. So that will be happening at the 2025 Pioneer of the Year award on October 8th at the Beverly Hilton.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that event happens in person. I'm planning to attend for the first time. I'll be able to,
awesome.
to show up to the dinner. So I'm really, really looking forward to it. Well, Chad, thank you so much for joining us here in the news and forecasting segment of the podcast. Coming up next after this short break is my conversation with Sperling Reich of Celluloid Junkie, going over the highlights of CineEurope 2025 and looking back at last month's Cannes Film Festival. That's coming up after the break.
Everyone's asking, what's next for cinema? What's the new thing? We've been watching films forever, and the medium's constantly changing, whether it's the type of stories we tell or the technology we use to tell them. The upcoming new technology from Christie called VDR enhances their existing CineLife real laser projectors with advanced contrast and better energy efficiency. The vivid, dramatic darks, brights, and colors stand out as a striking new reason to go to the theater. At this level of contrast, there's an extra sense of emotional connection with the film. It's a must-see for moviegoers once it debuts later this year. Christie also demonstrated VDR's capability of reducing energy consumption with an aim at sustainability and longevity. If you're curious about this upcoming technology, you can find out more at christiedigital.com/VDR.
And we are back here on the Box Office Podcast in this special CineEurope recap edition with my friend and colleague, Sperling Reich from Celluloid Junkie. Sperling, welcome back. Do people call you Jason anymore, or we just do the J at the front? J Sperling. There's no one out there that goes with Jason. Yeah. Did I just out what the J means? Did I just reveal?
Yeah, although I'm very willing to. I'm always, whenever somebody asks, I tell them, the bottom line is when I was born, there were like... Jason was the most popular name for probably 10 years.
The Jason of your generation is the Ryan of my generation.
Correct.
It's a good name. I like it. But we needed to go through the origin story. This is like deep dive exhibition trade secrets we're going here on the podcast. But as much as we all want to learn about our names, we do have to talk about the main event here that we just wrapped up, CineEurope 2025 in Barcelona, another edition of the official convention of Unique, that is the European Trade Association, representing cinemas in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. What did you think?
Exhibitors here from all over. There were exhibitors here from Nigeria. There were exhibitors here from Morocco. There were exhibitors here from Russia and Portugal. I don't know about Russia, actually. I saw somebody from Russia, but I don't know whether they were representing an exhibition, Jane.
Would be an interesting conversation with the studios if they attended, but we'll get into that topic later.
That is one of the big questions. Yeah, that's a big question about what are the studios going to do when they inevitably go back into Russia. And of course, some, not all,
chains have pirated films for the last 3 years. Right. Some, not all, but notable circuits in that country have resorted to those measures. Well, overall, what was the climate at the event like? We know that the European recovery in some instances has been faster than the North American recovery, certainly faster than the Latin American recovery. But you still have some markets that depend highly on a local market to perform. And that's been, I think, a little complicated. I'm thinking of countries like Turkey that have had a number of off years with local productions, and that has had a huge impact. Italy is either hot one year or cold the other. It's really hard to figure out what the situation in Italy is year to year. The UK and Ireland and France, Germany, Spain, those seem to be the core European moneymakers for the studios. They seem to be pretty well stabilized at this point.
Yeah, and you know what? I've always said, and I've said this for years, that if Hollywood doesn't fill the gap, meaning if Hollywood decides to make fewer films, then unlike in previous decades, say the 1990s or 80s or early 2000s, making a movie is getting easier. So because of digital, you don't have to buy film stock. You don't have to process film stock. You don't have to cut a film print, all of which costs a lot of money, is incredibly cumbersome. And there are lots of obstacles and ways to gatekeep the industry because of that. Well, now that it's all digital, you can shoot a film in October and release it in December. And that's exactly what's happening. You have a lot of countries who ordinarily might make, exaggerating here, they might make 2 or 3 films. Now they're making 10, 15, 20 films. So when Hollywood decides, well, we don't want to release anything in March, well, along comes, the Italian productions that wind up doing great in January, February, March, and April. And 50% or 45% of their box office is coming from local productions. Whereas before it was like a 70-30 split. You see that going the other way now, where it's now all of a sudden 40% and 45%. So much like I would tell Detroit in the 1950s and 60s, be very careful, because if you don't watch it, all of a sudden you'll have product, in this case movies, from other countries coming into your territory and doing well, i.e. Parasite.
Sounding a lot like a precedent, Sperling. I don't know what you're going to suggest next, man, but, dangerous ground we're going into. Now, it's great to hear that the European market has been able to recover, in some instances, very well and very quickly. What was the mood at CineEurope like? Because if we remember, CinemaCon 2025 from day one, second one, people wanted to talk about windows, and it was a combative conversation. A lot of major exhibition executives calling very loudly for a 45-day window. Is that the case right now in Europe as well? Or how did that conversation evolve in Barcelona in June as opposed to where it was in Las Vegas back in April?
Well, a couple differences between CinemaCon and CineEurope. The first is when you and I got to CinemaCon in Las Vegas in March, it was after a brutal first quarter. And you had a lot of exhibitors when you said, "Hey, how you doing?" They would go, I don't know, man. I'm doing as well as I can. I'm hanging in there, And that was on Monday. But by Thursday, after they saw all of the reels from all of the studios and distributors that were there, they're like, "Oh, I'm doing okay. Things are looking up." And nothing had changed at all, except for two things. One, they'd seen the next 12 months of their life, of their business, and they'd seen all of the different movies that they were going to be booking. And the other thing is they had been watching over the course of that particular week the sales for Minecraft go from an $80 million opening to a potentially over $120 million opening. So they knew, okay, March is over. We're going to have a big April. And they were right. So they were very positive. Here at CineEurope, and of course, as you said, by the way, at CinemaCon, you also had this question about the windows. You had it come from a discussion directly from Michael O'Leary, the president of Cine United, which represents all of the exhibitors. You had it come up during not one, but two different panels on that very first day. So within the first 2 days, that Monday and that Tuesday, it came up in three very high profile moments in which everybody was paying attention, including the media. CineEurope is a different story. So people they had a great April. May was pretty good. June is looking good. You can see that the films from June forward, the big Hollywood releases are going to be there. The local releases are already there. You have movies in the UK like Salt Path, which are doing pretty well. So at least from the standpoint of, hey, are we going to have anything to sell? The answer is, yeah, we do. We just now have to save up our money because we spent the past 2 years spending it. And how are we going to get to laser projection or to HDR or to variable dynamic range? And of course, you have the big elephant at the end of the year, Avatar, Fire and Ash, which everybody's very much looking forward to. So people were already optimistic going into CineEurope, and certainly that mood was maintained, if not elevated, during CineEurope, as the different studios and distributors presented their sizzle reels and their product reels. As far as the windows go, there's really only maybe 3 sessions that you could bring that up, and they're all on the first day. Some people are still arriving on that Monday. And it was brought up by one of the exhibitors during the executive roundtable saying, we need windows to be increased and standardized. And Jane Hastings from EVT in Australia, always very smart in everything she says. I mean, she is just, I love listening to her speak on a panel. I love talking to her. She is just so brilliant.
Yeah, one of the most incisive executives, I think, on a global level in our industry. It's always a pleasure, like you say, having her in a roundtable. She always delivers, I think, the viewpoints that maybe a number of other executives might tiptoe around. She'll be very direct and upfront about it.
Right. And she, not only is she direct and upfront about it, she goes right to the point, whereas I search for words to find, she not only has the words at the tip of her fingers and is able to use them in like surgical precision. She's very good. She could say like 6 words and you get the point. It's amazing. And she basically said, in no uncertain terms, hey, the consumer is confused. They don't know when a movie is leaving the theaters. Very true. I don't know. And I'm in this business. I don't know. They don't know whether every movie's on SVOD or premium video on demand in 2 weeks or not. So in the end, they make no decisions. So that was raised very quickly, is that we as an industry have confused the consumer. So how do we educate them and educate them to whatever it is we decide on what the window will be? I was talking to Steve Thompson from Palster, who raised the issue. He said, I've heard about this Windows issue. And I keep hearing that people say it's a problem, that it's it's not long enough for exhibitors. Distributors are leaving money on the table, and that together as an industry, we have confused the audience. But what I never hear is, how do we fix that problem? Nobody ever comes up with the solution.
Well, there's one solution, Sperling. It's a 45-day minimum global window. And I say global because you're seeing this in Europe right now. Even if you have an extended exclusivity window, like you have in places like France, that doesn't matter if that same title's available on digital because it hit PVOD after its third week in the US. As soon as you have in any iteration in any market a pristine digital copy of a film anywhere online, forget your foreign exclusivity window. Forget it. It's useless at that point because that movie
Right.
is freely available to pirate online. That's the solution. The solution was laid out at CinemaCon by that executive roundtable exhibition saying loudly. Michael O'Leary from Cinema United in a State of the Industry address saying loudly, 45-day plus minimum across the board globally. Otherwise, there's no solution here.
Right. The gentleman from Cinepolis that was here also works. He's in charge of EMEA. And so he, of course, works with Indonesia. And he's saying the second you release it on premium video on demand in the United States, you can forget Indonesia's off the table because it's pirated and it's over there. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And by the way, in a world where you then had to remarket a film when it went to VOD and you had to then sell the DVD or the Blu-ray, yes, it was a problem. You had to market twice. You had to market for the home video and you had to market for the theatrical release. Now, almost every one of these studios has their own streaming platform. Here's how you market. When somebody logs in, it's right on the homepage. Word spreads. You know, it's not that hard. You mark it on Amazon. Everybody's on Amazon. And all of a sudden people know, oh, okay, that's now available. Amazon. It's become a little bit easier. Now, I'm sure there are executives out there that would debate that and would argue with me and say that's not true. But as much as it's easier to release a movie and make a movie these days, it has become a bit easier to market the transition from theatrical to home video.
Yeah, well, the distance is shortened between one marketing campaign and the other, so you can really optimize them. And I completely understand that, in the sense that 90 days is probably too long at this point, as much as I'd like to see it. The realities of a streaming ecosystem and marketing within that, you don't see an optimized marketing campaign working across a 90-day window. But 45, I still think is a sensible solution. So I do think, to answer Steve's question, I think there's a solution out there, but there's only one. And it's what we talked about at CinemaCon. It's 45-day plus minimum, and you're going to have to get everybody's buy-in for it. I think that's going to be difficult. The second question is, even if you get all the major studios to agree to it, will the streamers? Because as much as I love to have an Amazon MGM that's going to give us 16 theatrical films next year, I haven't heard a peep on what that exclusivity window is going to be. And is that going to be a exclusivity window that transitions to a transactional VOD model or straight into Prime SVOD, like they did with Red One? Because if they did the Red One method in that 2026 slate that we all want to see from Amazon MGM, I don't think there's going to be a lot of people in this industry happy about that.
Right. Well, they weren't happy when Red One left.
No, it was a huge deal. It was a huge deal.
And it was still playing well.
Yeah,
I'm
which
sure
was the frustrating part of it.
Everybody would argue their point. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the movies, because one thing about CineEurope that we love to hear about are all of the studio presentations, who shows up, what gets previewed, and what the reactions are. Now, you and I are in a really cool position in that we're maybe the only two people that attend both events from the press side. So you get to read the room on the same movies, sometimes on the same content across both events. So what were the differences here in CineEurope on the presentations? What did we get to see for the first time? And what played differently in Barcelona than the way it did back in Las Vegas in April?
Well, a lot of it was the same material, or it was, there were a few extra scenes. 28 Days Later, for instance, they showed the first 28 minutes of it. Of course, you heard a bit of a groan because it's like, if you're going to show me 28 minutes, just show me the movie. It's coming out tomorrow.
In 2 days, yeah. As we record this, I've seen it already. Wild movie, by the way. Just bonkers.
Yeah.
You saw a third of a movie that is basically 4 movies rolled into one.
Yeah, and I was just like, okay, I'm not a big horror movie fan, but that was actually pretty good. That was really good. I now want to go see that movie. So if they wanted to get people to see it in this business, congratulations, they got me to want to go see that movie. I would say also, I guess you asked what played differently in the room. Without a doubt, Naked Lunch was by far the easiest.
Of course, you're not talking about the David Cronenberg title Naked Lunch.
I
You're
keep
talking about the comedy from Paramount, Naked Gun, which is a remake of a different film.
Correct. I would say Naked Lunch, when I went and had lunch naked, that didn't play well.
Yes. What do you do on Wednesday evenings in Barcelona, Sperling, is
It's
not
my
for
business.
this podcast. Yes.
Right.
But Naked Gun did have a different reaction in the room. Now, that's interesting because we've heard this a lot in this global box office, that comedies don't get made as much because you really are relying on overseas territories, overseas markets, and culturally, comedies don't tend to play as well. Naked Gun is an exception to that rule, where we have
a lot of
major studio comedy. And yeah, it's a visual sort of comic film, also coming in and remaking, I think, a classic from the 80s. How did exhibitors at this event react to the footage they saw?
Well, with the caveat that I would say Mark Vian at CineEurope every year, we all know that Chris Aronson at CinemaCon comes in on a chariot the year that Gladiator is, or flies in from the ceiling the year that Mission Impossible is being released. In this particular instance, it's Mark Vian because it's CineEurope, so he's dealing with international. And every year he gets the entire international team together and he cuts a good 3 to 5 minute little skit, if you will, based on whatever big movie they're pushing. So one year it was Top Gun, and he was flying around in the plane with all of the, Helen Moss was, one of the heads of international was also, and literally Yit Ching Lee. Everybody is a part of this. This year it was Naked Gun, and of course Mark was the main character, and it was hilarious. So by the time they got to the Naked Gun trailer, there was laughter, no doubt, but not as nearly as much as there was at CinemaCon.
That's interesting. So it's more of a muted reception to the footage we saw, because that footage killed it at the Coliseum at CinemaCon.
Right. And I thought, oh, maybe this isn't going to do as well in Europe. Cut to 20 minutes later, standing outside the auditorium, and all of the exhibitors talking about how Naked Gun is hilarious.
Oh, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. We have a really interesting and exciting summer slate coming to our theaters globally in the coming weeks and months. But you also got to look at some of the films that are going to be hitting screens in the fall and winter for award season, not in Barcelona, but in southern France. You also attended the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year. We never did a proper recap of the event because I wanted to wait to talk to you about what you saw there and what the vibe was among some of the award contenders in 2025. Jafar Panahi's It Was Just an Accident winning the Palme d'Or, but a number of other films from major filmmakers, major auteurs, making this a very compelling slate. Out of everything at Cannes this year, what stood out to you the most? And the second part of that question, what has the most commercial appeal for exhibitors?
Well, okay. So what's interesting, and I can relate this back to CineEurope. A couple years ago, I think it was 2022, Triangle of Sadness wins the Palme d'Or. A month later, they tried to screen it at CineEurope. 90 people showed up. They screened it on. And so this year, when the studio said, we don't want to bring a film, there was very little pushback from UNIC or Film Expo. So they had no full films here except for Sketch from Angel Studios. Angel Studios was
that was the only screening this year, the final day Thursday screening of Sketch.
And they heard a lot from the Film Expo group, and UNIC heard a lot from the delegates. Hey, we want more films. And they said, well, guys, you never show up for it. We had Triangle of Sadness, unknown at the time to the exhibitors here at CineEurope, and yet it would go on to be nominated for a ton of awards, including Best Feature. It was nominated for a lot of Academy Awards and was a huge player throughout the fall. But in June of that year, nobody knew what it was, so they didn't go. So, of course, this year there were fewer films. They got the message, Film Expo Group and UNIC. Ideally, there'll be more films moving forward. So this year you say, well, what was the big film? That's the thing about this particular year at Cannes. And that's what everybody was waiting for throughout that festival is, where's the big movie? Where's the big moment? Where's the Triangle of Sadness? Where's the Parasite? Where's the Anora? Where there's that big explosion of buzz where you're like, that's it. That's the movie. That's the reason we come to Cannes. And there was nothing like that. That said, there was also very little that was just awful. So it was kind of a very even-keeled year.
From what you saw at the event, what has the most commercial appeal at this event? Because we know Neon A24, Movie, they're big buyers at this. Of course, Netflix is as well. And that plays a role in what doesn't make it to theaters. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But you do have examples over the years like Neon with Honora, that coming out of a great win at the Cannes Film Festival was able to give it a long theatrical run and take home Best Picture. What is that movie that you're going to be able to see in multiplexes across the country?
It was just an accident, which, by the way, Neon picked up during the festival. Because remember, Cannes is a market as much as it is a festival. So there are movies that go there. This movie from Jafar Panahi from Iran, which is now picked up by Neon for the US and, of course, for other territories as well. I don't know that people will go see it. It's a very interesting film. It's a good film. It was definitely one of the stronger films that was there, and it had a lot to say about someone who was a political prisoner who believes he has found his former jailer. He's identified him through the sound of his prosthetic leg dragging on the floor. But then he wants to know whether he's, after kidnapping this man, is he really the guard that beat us? So he kidnaps this potential prison guard and then drags him to all the fellow inmates to try and find out, is this him? And they're all just as unsure. So that's quite the setup there.
That has commercial appeal, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It totally does. Sound of Falling, a beautiful museum piece, beautiful to look at, poetic, 4 generations of women on the same farm cutting back and forth from, the turn of the century through World War I and then the current day. Beautiful to look at, 2 hours, 40 minutes. Most people loved it. I was plus minus. I was like, okay, it looks beautiful. It feels beautiful. What does it have to say? Die My Love from Lynn Ramsey probably got all the press because it sold for $24 million to Mubi, M-U-B-I. This is a film starring Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson. They play a married couple who move to a rural area and kind of start refurbishing and living in his ancestor's house. So his grandparents' house. She kind of begins to go mentally unstable. It's one of those movies that's 2.5 hours long and I think is kind of a mess. I don't know what they see, $24 million. It sold for $24 million. I don't know that it will make.
What they see is Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson. And what they see is a November 7 release date. When we talk about films with a commercial appeal, that carries weight.
The Sentimental Value by Joachim Trier, who had The Worst Person in the World previously.
I can't wait to see this.
It's a very good movie. And Renata Gonzalez is back. And she is, of course, she was in The Worst Person in the World. And she plays an actress who is kind of a little mentally, she's got anxiety issues. She has a sister. Their father is a famous film director who has not necessarily been the greatest father in the world. And their mother has died and is now leaving the house to them to kind of fix up or to sell. It sounds boring and yet was one of the better films in Cannes. It was very, very good.
It's on the top of my list. I also have to ask you about Eddington from Ari Aster.
Yeah, it's one of those, if you're in the bag for Ari Aster, you'll love it. Most people did not.
Sounds like his last movie.
Highly anticipated and yet let everybody down. Mm-hmm. Almost everybody. There were some people that really liked it, but I can't say that I was
I'm
one
part
of them.
The Beau is Afraid crowd. I am not afraid of saying that. And if that's the future of Ari Aster movies, I don't mind it, honestly. I think he's got a following. I think it reminds me a lot of how Phoenician Scheme played theatrically. That's another film from Wes Anderson that was at Cannes this year that if you're in the bag for Wes Anderson movies, you're going to have a good time. If you're not, maybe skip it. I think Ari Aster is squarely in that realm with his last 2 films.
You asked me before we began recording about the Brazilian film, The Secret Agent.
Of course I did. My friend Clever Mendonça Filho, man, I love his movies. How did The Secret Agent play at Cannes?
It played incredibly well. In fact, it won Best Director and also Best Actor. So it won the most awards, in fact. And it's a movie that takes place in the 1970s about a guy on the run. You don't really know why. He gets set up in a place where there's a lot of people kind of in a witness protection type program from the government, which at that point was a dictatorship. You don't know necessarily why he's on the run, but you know that it has something to do with the government and there's something going on. It's very good, actually.
And we've got two established American auteurs coming up with new films at the event. Let's talk about Kelly Reichardt's The Mastermind, which was picked up by Mubi, and they will be releasing that in a limited release in October 17th of this year. That stood out as one of the most interesting films on the schedule. I love Kelly Reichardt's films. They're not commercial. They don't have to be. They don't pretend to be. One of the reasons I like her so much. I can't wait to see this one. What did you think?
I didn't see it either because it literally played on the last day when most people were leaving. However, the people that did see it thought it was very strong. And they said it is just as good as her previous films, although her previous films were good and nobody saw them. So in the theater, at least. So they were art house films that few people saw, unfortunately.
Well, talking about art house films, that's a great transition to the last title we're going to be discussing in this segment, Nouvelle Vague from Richard Linklater. I don't know what to say about this. One of the most important filmmakers of the last 20, 30 years here in American cinema that has been relegated to Netflix over the last
I do not understand
5 to 10 years. I don't get it. It's exasperating. By the way, I feel the same way about David Fincher. I don't know why you have major filmmakers making made-for-TV movies that are not marketed and are underseen. But listen, Nouvelle Vague, one of the buzziest titles coming into the event. Now a Netflix movie. Good luck to the 17 people that see it there. Yeah.
It got picked up at Netflix, and I can tell you most likely why. So it's Richard Linklater is interesting, of course, Boyhood. And what was the last one he did that went to Netflix with The Hitman, actually. I was going to say it was about a hitman. It was called Hitman. It's about the making of Breathless and how it was so chaotic. And Gene Seberg was like, why am I in this movie? I don't get it.
No, forget it. Forget it. I mean, that's it. Title's done. A movie about a hugely influential title, not only for French film culture, but for global movie-going culture. A movie about cinephiles that venerated the movie-going experience, going directly to Netflix, which will be marketed to absolutely no one and seen by the same 17 people that saw Hitman, one of the highest rated films out of Cannes last year, a complete afterthought in the movie-going culture in 2024. Tell me this is going to be different. I don't understand why these filmmakers, why these producers keep going back to that company. It's a garbage can. That's what it is. That you're putting your movie in the trash. No one's going to see it. They're not going to market it. They're not going to respect it. It's going to get forgotten. Guess what? If you want the audiences to see it on Netflix, just wait. It'll get licensed there after theatrical run.
Correct.
But this way, you take the bag, you lose the audience. I'm done with it. I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Well, the same was true of Fair Play years ago. That premiered at Sundance. The movie
wonderful
that
film,
at Sundance,
wonderful film seen by nobody.
That nobody saw. Exactly. Yeah. That said, there are some interesting films that might not have really big names behind them, but they kind of caused a little bit of a ripple. And one was by Harris Dickinson. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because 3 years ago, he was in Triangle of Sadness as an unknown actor. He is now doing both acting. He's playing John Lennon in the Sam Mendes Beatles movies, and he's also directing. He had a movie called Urchin. It's about an addict who in the UK who's trying to get his life sorted out. And you think, do I want to see this? And yet, because of the compelling performance that he gets out of the lead actor, it's actually a good movie. I think people went in with very low expectations. Like, what is this guy? He's been in this industry for 3.5 minutes directing a movie. He did a good job. And Urchin is one of those films that did get picked up and I think will be seen ideally theatrically. Another one that is The History of Sound by Oliver Hermanus. This movie, I believe, is a Universal film. It stars Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor. I mean, it's a very well-acted movie. It's a very well-made movie. Will it be able to break out? I don't know. That's what I mean. It wasn't Brokeback Mountain where you kind of leave going, oh my God, I've seen The Second Coming. It was a fine movie. And that was kind of Cannes this year, which is not bad. I don't see that as being a bad thing. That was called The History of Sound. A Poet by Mesa Soda out of Colombia. Again, these are all art house films. Will they break out? They were all picked up. I think maybe the sleeper hit of the year, at least from an independent standpoint, might be Splitsville. And I cannot remember for the life of me who is releasing this. Oh, it's Neon, actually. I remember thinking Neon has a hit on its hands. It's by Michael Angelo Cavino. And he and his, I want to say friend from childhood, maybe they're just friends, I don't know. They make these movies. They made The Climb a couple of years ago. I thought it was okay.
Yeah, the bike movie, two
Right.
friends riding bikes through mountains. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is two friends. Starts off, one of those friends is married to a woman and she wants a divorce. There's some back and forth. It's kind of a polyamorous. It's just hilarious. Dakota Johnson is in it. It's a very, very funny movie. I mean, this was the kind of movie that people were laughing out loud to the point where you missed some of the dialogue.
I'm looking forward to seeing not only these titles, but everything that we mentioned here on this episode hit theaters in the coming weeks. Of course, with the exception of the Linklater title, which, again, will be available for $7.99 in the trough you subscribe to at home. Other than that, thanks so much for joining us here, Sperling. A great update on CineEurope 2025 and Cannes 2025.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the good news with Cannes is that market is bouncing back. That's the good news.
Yeah, we needed to. We need great movies to hit our screens in the fall and winter months as we get to award season. Always interesting insights, Sperling. Thank you for joining us. And now, to finish up this episode, is Rebecca Pauley's interview with Alan Fernandez from Christie, going over the technology manufacturer's latest innovations and some of their own highlights from CineEurope 2025. That's coming up after this break.
Imagine a world where your cinema's digital experience is as unforgettable as the movies you show. At Box Office, we strive to make that world a reality. We offer innovative solutions like custom-built websites, mobile apps, and user-friendly ticketing pages, crafted to meet the unique needs of cinemas. It's all about enhancing customer loyalty and making booking a breeze. Take your cinema's online experience to the next level with Boost. Contact us today at sales@boxoffice.com to learn more.
And I am joined here by Alan Fernandez, Senior Product Manager at Christie, who I believe has just come back from CineEurope. I hope you don't have any jet lag. How you doing?
No, I'm pretty good. I feel good today.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, I was not at CineEurope, but a lot of our listeners stateside were not at CineEurope either. So I'm really excited to have this opportunity to speak with you, to get the skinny on what was there and some of the new technologies.
Yeah, so what we showed at CineEurope this year, very much the same at what we showed at CinemaCon this just a few months ago. But we had a select lineup of our Christie real laser projector portfolio, pure RGB illumination. We also showed off the new Christie IMB-S4, which is actually now being shipped to the market as of September of last year. IMB is the media block. 10 years ago when laser first came out, there was a lot of speculation, a lot of skepticism around the lifetime of laser devices and kind of the same kind of skepticism that you see with electric cars nowadays. Oh, you're going to buy an electric car, it's super expensive. And then when the battery dies, you've got a big dead paperweight that is going to cost you more to replace the battery than the car is worth. And I think that's maybe in the early days that was partially true, but we're a decade in now into laser-based projection. And it's safe to say that laser devices are just so stable. They've matured a lot in the last few years. And they're probably the thing that's the least to worry about in a digital projection system. So you save on not having to swap out lamps. You're saving on landfill. You're going green effectively, saving on waste. And then the projectors come with a lot of new smart technologies that are incorporated into that CineLife Plus electronics platform. So for those viewers that don't know what CineLife Plus is, it's Christie's way of describing a Series 4 cinema projector, and then real laser is what kind of identifies what kind of light source is inside that projector. So real laser being a pure RGB illumination system.
So I know another big component of Christie's presence at CineEurope this year is something called VDR, or Variable Dynamic Range. I had the opportunity to see this technology in action from an earlier version of Christie's presentation at CinemaCon, I think 2 years ago. And I remember being really striking. I remember thinking about it afterwards because it was like, I could tell with VDR it looked better, but I could not for the life of me explain why. I'm just saying, it's more professional, it's slicker, I don't know, the colors are richer, I don't know what it is, but it's better. And that's great, I think, because there's so much investment going on in the cinema space now, and gigantic screens, immersive seating, things like that, and that's great. But we as an industry cannot neglect improving upon the quote unquote standard basic movie-going experience. Like it seems like VDR is a way of improving that as opposed to like a brand new piece of technology.
We weren't really trying to sell a new fancy piece of technology to the market to enhance the viewing experience for, the large PLFs. When I say PLF, premium large format, the IMAXs and stuff, to compete in that space. What we were primarily first and foremost was to, how can we even improve the total cost of ownership, reduce energy costs for the exhibitor primarily, and then at the same time enhance the viewing experience on top of that. So we're kind of killing two birds with one stone here, but going after understanding that the business model for most exhibition is, it's complex.
So I want to go back to something you said a minute ago. HDR versus VDR. VDR is, well, obviously it's variable, but it's more targeted in terms of affecting the image. So that decreases the energy consumption even more?
Yep. So I'll kind of, just to give you a very high level overview of what VDR is doing. It's looking at the image. So what the projector is doing is it's analyzing all of that incoming data. And it looks at every single frame of data, and it looks at how much headroom does that frame have from what's in the image to how bright theoretically that projector could go, how it's been calibrated to that screen. And then it calculates how much we can actually variably change the laser power and make sure we maintain color accuracy. And what we do is we drop the laser levels as much as we possibly can to make sure that the image, the bright parts of the image and the color doesn't change at all. But all of a sudden now you're deepening your black. So you're really reducing the black level, and that's what makes the image pop. So you're not getting brighter, but you're making that contrast significantly impacted on a larger scale, which gives that tangible improvement to the image. So variable dynamic range is exactly that. It's the projector is variably changing the laser drive levels based on what is on that single frame, maximizing its potential for that screen, right?
So you have high dynamic range technology, which basically, the blacks are blacker, the whites are whiter, the colors just look better. So variable dynamic range, what is that? How does that differ from HDR?
Yeah. So if you think about, let's say if you have really dark scenes, right, in a movie, those dark scenes are going to be limited by the contrast floor of that projector. If you're not modulating the light level, you're going to be at 2000 to 1. And most cinemas today are running at 2000 to 1 contrast. And that's where things get challenging. So by lowering the light levels, the laser power levels, we're doing this on a frame by frame. It's happening really fast, 24 frames per second, right? Standard cinema content. When we're doing that, we're dropping the power consumption of those laser devices by 30 to 40% on average. So you're getting a substantial energy savings on that back end while making those dark scenes really look, come to life with detail. And of course, preserving or actually adding to that creative and artistic intent, allowing that to be used in a standard traditional projection environment. So it makes a big difference. Yeah,
that's wild to me that it improves the quality while also cutting down the energy costs. Because I think the conventional wisdom is if you improve one, the other one's going to suffer, and that's
always a compromise, right? What we're doing here is with VDR is again, tackling that total cost of ownership, enhancing the on-screen experience, but primarily the biggest difference here is we don't need a separate master. You can play the same content that you've been getting all along.
So logistically, it seems much smoother from a delivery perspective.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll add this. Exhibitors are definitely investing into new PLF technologies, because that's where the big revenue is, and the big blockbuster movies are going to generate that revenue. But also they're investing in small screens. And that's really where things get challenging. To bring a new technology to a small screen with limited number of seats, it's almost impossible to justify those returns.
The micro cinema, like I love seeing like be a weird offbeat rep programming, and it's in a very small theater, but like It can be, you're so close to the screen or the angles or something with the small nature of that cinema, it can look different.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, like the exhibitors, any of those cinema operators, they want to enhance that experience on a small screen, but it's from it's cost prohibitive. With VDR, we're giving them that opportunity because it's a software upgrade on a projector they've already got, or they're looking to purchase a laser projector. And small screens, a lot of exhibitors, it's like the test bed now. They're doing all their what I call micro marketing. They're testing new features, or they're testing dine-in cinema, or maybe they're going to test new seats and see how that the local market reacts.
Or test like a child-friendly theater, or
exactly,
where you like throw axes at I don't.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of local marketing strategies that are tested on small screens. And then once they find that they hone in on that right strategy, they can deploy to some of their more mainstream screens. So small screens play a pivotal role in what's happening in the market.
It's nice to hear that Christie is still putting in the work to innovate for those micro cinemas for the non-PLF screens, because
Absolutely.
That's what people still like to do. I mean, they're not going away anytime soon, thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. For sure.
So from an audience perspective, it boosts the quality of the image, of the contrast, regardless of whether you're in a small screen, small auditorium. From the exhibitor perspective, you get that savings in terms of energy. You get that sort of smoother process in terms of deliverables. What's the rollout of this technology look like?
We're rolling this technology out in what we call two different modes, licenses specifically. Standard mode, which is what is really the mass appeal. Standard mode is you buy a Christie projector, or you've already got one, for example. So it has to be a CineLight Plus real laser projector. You put the license on it, and you're going to go from 2,000 to 1 contrast to over 5,000 to 1 contrast. It's 2.5 times better contrast on screens. People will notice that. They might not tell you what it is, but they'll look at the image and be like, "Wow, that image really pops."
I can't say why this looks so much better. This at CinemaCon, but you guys know.
That's right. But people will know. People will see the difference, and they'll say, "Okay, well, that was a really nice presentation." Can't tell you exactly what it is, but yes, the image was really good. It popped, and that's what we're planning on. We don't have a specific date yet because there's still some more wrinkles to iron out, and we're working obviously starting to work with studios to make sure that we want people to test it. We want people to break it so we understand all of the edge cases. At the end of this calendar year is when we're expecting to launch the standard mode. End of this calendar year, early 2026.
Wicked for Good, Avatar, Fire and Ash. Those are movies that
Avatar is the one everyone's asking about, right? And I can't make any hard promises that it'll be available for Avatar, but we are targeting obviously end of this year because Avatar is such an important tentpole release this year. And then the second one is to address so there's DCI, which is Digital Cinema Initiative. So they're kind of the group of the Hollywood studios that develop the specs. They've basically drawn a line in the sand and they said, okay, for HDR content, these are the types of specs you have to hit. And it's 300 nits versus 48 nits. It's 60,000 to 1 contrast versus 5,000 to 1 contrast. It's a pretty big jump. If you wanted to take a Christie real laser projector and you want to be able to show DCI HDR content, then you would use the performance mode. Now, it comes with some different challenges or obstacles because that projector has to be sized for 300 nits now. It's 6 times more brightness on screen. So, but then again, it also gives smaller screens the opportunity to display HDR material when the time comes. We don't have a release date for performance mode yet because it's a lot more involved.
So you're starting to roll out that kind of standard version around November 2025. You said there's not an exact date. For people who want to know more information or want to ask some questions or get tech specs before you start, rolling out the sales and marketing side of the equation, where should they go to get that information?
Or you can go to the christiedigital.com/VDR website, and that will be routinely updated with new information as time goes on. But that's the landing page for VDR currently.
Okay, awesome. I'm definitely excited to see it rolled out. It's an amazing looking technology, even when I saw it in its earlier form. So I'm bummed that I didn't get to see it at CineEurope, but I'm very excited to see it at my normal theater.
Me too.
Yeah, Ellen, it was so great to speak with you, and yeah, I'm super excited to see the technology and see what you guys have coming up at CinemaCon next year.
Awesome. Thanks, Rebecca. It was very nice meeting you.
And that was Rebecca Pauley interviewing Christie's Alan Fernandez. Earlier, you heard from Celine Song, director of Materialists, and before that, you heard from my colleagues, Chad Kennerk and Sperling Wright. I'm Daniel Luria. Thank you again for joining us once again here on the Box Office Podcast. We'll be back with another episode next Thursday, so don't forget to sign up, subscribe, and review us when you get a chance. Thanks again for listening, and we will talk to you again next week.